Hi, this is Mrs. Camp, and this is AP World History Modern, Unit 5, Topic 8, Reactions to the Industrial Economy. This is part 1 of 2 parts, and this one is looking at causes. The following part, part 2, will be looking at the reactions to those causes and the results, the effects from those reactions. So first, let's take a look at the essential question. Explain the causes and effects of calls for change in industrial societies from 1750 to 1900. Now, if you are asked about causes and effects of calls for change after 1900, there will be organization, there will be such after 1900. We're looking right now at only before 1900. So the theme we're looking at is social interactions and organization, which is how society's group members and the norms that govern the interactions between these groups and between individuals that influence political, economic, and cultural institutions and organizations. So we're looking at historical developments now. These are the things that happened in history. So we're looking at industrial capitalism. Okay, that's what's going on with industrialization, capitalism being the economic system described by Adam Smith that replaces mercantilism with the countries that were involved with mercantilism, which ultimately was most places in the world. So, in response to social and economic changes brought about by industrial capitalism, some governments, organizations, and individuals promoted various types of political, social, educational, and urban reforms. Okay, there's a historical development also that talks about Asia, Africa, including Ottoman Empire, and China. So some reform and modernization going on there, but we are not going to be talking about that during this lecture. Please be sure to read about it in your book. We will probably talk about it some in class. So under that, we're looking at industrialized states where many workers organize themselves, often in labor unions, to improve working conditions, limit hours, and gain higher wages. Workers' movements and political parties emerged in different areas, promoting alternative visions of society. The second here is discontent, which is unhappiness with the established power structures, encouraged the development of various ideologies, including those espoused by Karl Marx and the ideas of socialism and communism. We're going to look at the 4 major causes of these calls for reform. The first being child labor, second, dangerous working conditions, third being long hours, and fourth, low pay. The first we're going to look at is child labor. And before we talk about it, I want you to take a moment and just look at these pictures. Children, generally as young as 7, but actually in some cases much younger, were working in urban areas, off the farms, in factories, in sweatshops, in a lot of them in mining. And being that young, the effects that happen to older teenagers and adults as a result of working in those conditions were made even worse. So I have 3 primary source testimonies. These are to a parliamentary committee. This is in 1819. I went to the pit at 7 years of age. When I drew by the girdle and chain, my skin was broken and the blood ran down. If we said anything, they would beat us. Robert North, he'd worked in a coal mine in Yorkshire. When I was a surgeon in the infirmary, accidents were very often admitted to the infirmary, through the child's hands and arms being caught in the machinery. In many instances, the muscles and the skin is stripped down to the bone, and in some instances, a finger or two might be lost. That is Michael Warr, a doctor who'd been working in Manchester. Manchester was a center of industrialization that became one of the most significant cities of the time. The third is a 17-year-old. This is later. This is 1842. I hurry the corvees a mile or more underground and back. They weigh 300 cwt. I hurry 11 a day. I wear a belt and chain at the workings to get the corvees out. The getters that I work for are naked except their caps. They pull off all their clothes. I see them at work when I go up. Sometimes they beat me, if I am not quick enough, with their hands. They strike me upon my back. The boys take liberties with me, and sometimes they pull me about. I am the only girl in the pit. There are about 20 boys and 15 men. All the men are naked. I would rather work in a mill than in a coal pit. I'll be posting some of the links to the primary sources and to images that you'll see in this to Google Classroom. So second, let's take a look at working conditions. As you can see, the working conditions, the child labor testimonies I just read are also testimony to working conditions. So here we have an image of people working in a sweatshop, but actually the sweatshop is not located in a factory, it's a tenement. Tenements are closely spaced buildings, very run down, very cheaply constructed, where we would have maybe 10 people living together in a small room. We would have extended families squishing together. In tenements, diseases would run rampant. When one person got it, it would travel very quickly. And so we can see here that it's not just living in the tenement, but it's working. Here we're switching from sweatshops and tenements to mill workers. I'm going to read the following document or excerpt, but I want to note that adipose tissue is fat. Okay, stature is height, and bowing of the legs is a curvature in the leg. Their complexion is sallow and pallid, with a peculiar flatness of feature, caused by the want of a proper quantity of adipose substance. Their stature low, a very general bowing of the legs. Nearly all have flat feet. So we're going to see some more images of what things were like before the tragedy of the fire. Here we have women and girls in rows. They're here and they are cutting the fabric, and the fabric that is left over gets thrown into bins. Over here we have a similar situation. We've got women over here. We've got men over here. They are all working in the same area. As you can see, very crowded, lots of people close together, lots of fabric that is very flammable. So let's take a look at what happened in this fire. Okay, so 150 perish in factory fire Women and girls trapped in 10-story building, lost in flames, or hurl themselves to death. You can see this is a newspaper cover. You can see that picture that we looked at before. And they're telling where offices were, where people were working. You can see that the fire is initially only on the top floors. So March 25th, 1911. So this factory was located in New York City and Manhattan. The situation for the women and girls and men were that the doors to stairs and exits were locked so that they could not get out except when they were specifically unlocked at the end of a shift. This was to prevent people from stealing from the employer. As you can imagine, that sets up a situation that's very dangerous if there is something that happens within that room or outside of that room for people to get out. The fire, they believe, was started, the fire marshal said, was started by a match that hadn't been extinguished or a cigarette butt in one of those scrap bins with all the fabric that were by the women and the men. And all of those scraps were incredibly flammable. So this was the deadliest industrial disaster in New York City history and one of the deadliest in U.S. history. A total of 146 workers died. 123 were women and girls. They worked 9 hours Monday through Friday, 7 hours on Saturday. So here we have dangerous working conditions. We have some of them are girls. Then we'll have long hours, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. And then we also had 23 men who died. Mostly they were Italian and Jewish immigrants, and girls 14 to 23. And the causes of death: fire, smoke inhalation, or falling or jumping to their deaths. As you can imagine, the panic that would ensue when the doors are locked and you cannot get out. The 9th floor was actually warned of this happening, but there was no word gotten to the 10th floor. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. The 10th floor was warned, but there was no word gotten to the 9th floor. And as you can see over here in the picture on the right, this is after the fire. Okay, so we're moving on to the third cause, long work hours, that led to the calls for reform and the reforms. Let's take a We can see here that we have data for North America, we have data for Europe, and we have data for Australia. Looking at a graph that's broken down by areas in Europe specifically, we have up here at the very beginning of the tracking of these data, we've got from 70 in Belgium down to about 63-ish in Italy. As we look over time, time is increasing here. 1880, 1900, we see these hours, they are flat in France and then start to go on. Same thing for Italy, but you can see that Belgium and Switzerland start going down right away. A lot of the reforms took effect in this time period, and then as you can see, things are changing again. So note that 1940 here is World War II in Europe, which actually goes back into the 30s. And then right here in the late teens, we have World War I in Europe. We're not looking at the Japan theater, the war, or Russia, because we're looking specifically here at Western Europe. So we have here data showing that time spent working full time decreased over time, and then we can also map here and about here to the world wars. Okay, now we're going to be looking at pay. So if we look at this chart, we're looking at wages in Lancashire in shillings. This is in 1930, and it's broken down by age as well as by gender. So here we have age, and then over here we have men and women. Okay, so when children are under 11, we can see that male and female wages are close but different. Okay, same as we go here. You can also see that younger children make significantly less than older adults. Here we have the first real big difference in pay, where men are making 10 shillings and women are making 7 shillings. We can see that that goes up as men get older, going from 10 to 17. So that's plus 7. But when you look at women over here, we're looking at just over 1 shilling. You can see here the highest that women get paid at any point here is right here at 37 to 41. That's where women get paid the most. For men, it's actually a little bit different. It's 32 to 36. But you can see that women top out at just under 10 shillings. Women top out at just under 10 shillings and men at just under 23 shillings. So that is about 2.5 times that men are making over what women are making. So here we're looking at a graph, shillings per week, 1831, breaking it down by male and female. This makes it even clearer what's going on. And so I'm going to conclude this with some pictures for you to watch. These are the consequences of industrialization, the long hours, the pay, etc. And as arresting as these images were, their true legacy doesn't lie in their aesthetic power or their documentary value, but instead in their ability to actually affect change. These are by Jacob Riis. This book was published in 1890, and when Theodore Roosevelt was on the police commissioner's board in 1894, before he ran for president, he said to Riis, "I've read your book and I have come to help." And then Roosevelt did go ahead and make good on that statement.